Nation Audiobooks present Give and Take, a revolutionary approach to success by Adam Grant. Part 3. FreeCycle initially provided a sense of optimal distinctiveness through its emphasis on protecting the environment. The central goal was different from most recycling movements. Instead of reprocessing old materials into new ones, members found recipients who wanted goods that couldn't be reprocessed, keeping them out of landfills. This common purpose created a shared identity within the FreeCycle community, fostering a sense of connection across diverse ideologies. The original group of FreeCycle volunteers in Tucson included a liberal Democrat who was passionate about environmental sustainability, a conservative Republican who didn't believe in waste, and a libertarian who wanted to empower people to do things themselves, rather than relying on governmental support. Over time, as membership expanded and diversified, each FreeCycle community provided an outlet for people to customize giving to their own interests. In New York, for example, a local group made a habit of shutting down a city block for FreeCycle gifting events. By fostering a common identity and opportunities for unique self-expression, FreeCycle was able to mobilize a giving system based on generalized reciprocity. You give to help others in the community, and you know that someone in the community will give to you. But Willer's team finds that there's a catch. Such a system depends on a critical mass of exchange benefits, which creates positive sentiments toward the group, sentiments that help fuel further contributions. In other words, people only identify with a generalized giving group after they receive enough benefits to feel like the group is helping them. With FreeCycle, this outcome was by no means guaranteed. After all, if the givers on the site had been overwhelmed by takers looking for a free ride, the whole thing might never have gotten off the ground. How did FreeCycle accumulate that initial critical mass of giving and discourage free riding? Why Superman backfires and people conserve electricity. When FreeCycle first launched, one of the early members was a 98-year-old man. He collected parts to fix up bicycles and gave them to local children. He was an incredible role model, Darren Beal recalls. Tucson citizens were able to identify with the man as a fellow resident. When they saw him give, he was a member of their unique community, so they felt more compelled to follow his example. New York University psychologist Jonathan Haidt refers to this as elevation, the warm feeling of being moved by others' acts of giving, which can seem to push a mental reset button, wiping out feelings of cynicism and replacing them with a sense of moral inspiration. When elevated, Haidt and psychologist Sarah Algo write, "We feel as though we have become, for a moment, less selfish, and we want to act accordingly." But it was more than just common identity that made this elderly man such an elevating role model. Consider an experiment by psychologists Leif Nelson and Michael Norton, who randomly assigned people to list either 10 features of a superhero or 10 features of Superman. When invited to sign up as community service volunteers, the group that listed superhero features was nearly twice as likely to volunteer as the Superman group. 3 months later, Nelson and Norton invited both groups to a meeting to kick off their volunteering. The people who had written about a superhero were 4 times more likely to show up than the people who had written about Superman. Thinking about a superhero 3 months earlier supported giving. In comparison, thinking about Superman discouraged giving. Why? When people think about the general attributes of superheroes, they generate a list of desirable characteristics that they can relate to themselves. In the study, for example, people wrote about how superheroes are helpful and responsible, and they wanted to express these giver values, so they volunteered. But when people think specifically about Superman, what comes to mind is a set of impossible standards, like those popularized in the TV series The Adventures of Superman. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. No one can be that strong or heroic, so why bother trying? On FreeCycle, givers modeled a standard that seemed attainable. When members saw a 98-year-old man building bikes for kids, they knew they could do something too. When members saw people giving away items like clothes and old electronics, they felt it would be easy for them to do the same. The small acts of giving that started on FreeCycle made it easy and acceptable for other people to give small amounts. Indeed, Cialdini finds that people donate more money to charity when the phrase, "even a penny will help," is added to a request. Interestingly, this phrase increases the number of people who give without necessarily decreasing the amount that they give. Legitimizing small contributions draws in takers, making it difficult and embarrassing for them to say no, without dramatically reducing the amount donated by givers. Although most people joined FreeCycle to get free stuff, this doesn't mean that taking was their primary reciprocity style. When people join a group, they look for cues about appropriate behavior. When new FreeCycle members saw similar others modeling low-cost acts of giving, it became natural for them to follow suit. By making giving visible, FreeCycle made it easy for people to see the norm. It's a powerful lesson, even more so when we realize how much the visibility of giving can affect reciprocity styles. In many domains of life, people end up taking because they don't have access to information about what others are doing. Just a few months after FreeCycle got off the ground, Cialdini worked with a team of psychologists to survey more than 800 Californians about their energy consumption. They asked the Californians how important the following factors were in shaping their decisions to save energy. It saves money. It protects the environment. It benefits society. A lot of other people are doing it. The Californians consistently reported that the most important factor was protecting the environment. Benefiting society was second, saving money was third, and following the lead of other people was last. Cialdini's team wanted to see whether people were right about their own motivations, so they designed an experiment. They visited nearly 400 homes in San Marcos, California, and randomly assigned them to receive one of 4 different types of door hangers. Save money by conserving energy. According to researchers at Cal State San Marcos, you could save up to $54 per month by using fans instead of air conditioning to keep cool in the summer. Protect the environment by conserving energy. According to researchers at Cal State San Marcos, you can prevent the release of up to 262 pounds of greenhouse gases per month by using fans instead of air conditioning to keep cool this summer. Do your part to conserve energy for future generations. According to researchers at Cal State San Marcos, you can reduce your monthly demand for electricity by 29% using fans instead of air conditioning to keep cool this summer. Join your neighbors in conserving energy. In a recent survey of households in your community, researchers at Cal State San Marcos found that 77% of San Marcos residents often use fans instead of air conditioning to keep cool in the summer. Cialdini's team conducted door-to-door interviews at each household, without knowing which door hangers they had. When asked how motivating the door hangers were, the residents whose hangers emphasized joining their neighbors reported the lowest motivation. They reported 18% lower desires to conserve energy than residents with the Protect the Environment hangers, 13% lower than residents with the Future Generations hangers, and 6% lower than residents with the Save Money hangers. But when Cialdini's team looked at the residents' energy bills to see what people actually did, they found something surprising. The residents were wrong about what motivated them. During the following 2 months, the residents whose door hangers emphasized joining their neighbors actually conserved the most energy. On average, the Join Your Neighbors hanger led to between 5 and 9% fewer daily kilowatt hours of energy used than the other 3 hangers, which were all equally ineffective. Knowing that other people were conserving energy was the best way to get residents to follow suit. But perhaps it was the people who were already conserving electricity in each neighborhood who responded most visibly, picking up the slack for the electricity takers. To find out whether sharing information about their neighbors' conservation efforts could motivate conservation among people who were consuming high levels of electricity, Cialdini's team ran another experiment with nearly 300 households in California. This time, they gave residents door hangers that provided feedback on how their electricity consumption compared with similar households in their neighborhood over the past week or 2. These door hangers provided feedback on whether residents were consuming less, giving, or more, taking, than their neighbors. Over the next few weeks, the electricity takers significantly reduced their energy consumption by an average of 1.22 kilowatt-hours per day. Seeing that they were taking more than the average in their neighborhood motivated them to match the average, decreasing their energy consumption. But this only works when people are compared with their neighbors. As Cialdini's team explains, the key factor was which other people, other Californians, other people in their city, or other residents in their specific community. Consistent with the idea that people are most influenced by similar others, the power of social norms grew stronger the closer and more similar the group was to the residents. The decision to conserve was most powerfully influenced by those people who were most similar to the decision makers, the residents of their own community. Inspired by this evidence, the company Opower sent home energy report letters to 600,000 households, randomly assigning about half of them to see their energy use in comparison with that of their neighbors. Once again, it was the takers, those consuming the most, who conserved the most after seeing how much they were taking. Overall, just showing people how they were doing relative to the local norm caused a dramatic improvement in energy conservation. The amount of energy saved by this feedback was equivalent to the amount of energy that would be saved if the price of electricity increased by up to 28%. People often take because they don't realize that they're deviating from the norm. In these situations, showing them the norm is often enough to motivate them to give, especially if they have mature instincts. Part of the beauty of FreeCycle is that members have constant access to the norm. Every time a member offers to give something away, it's transparent. Others can see how frequent giving is, and they want to follow suit. Because FreeCycle is organized in local communities, members are seeing giving by their neighbors, which provides feedback on how their own giving stacks up relative to the local norm. Whether people tend to be givers, takers, or matchers, they don't want to violate the standards set by their neighbors, so they match. Today, according to Yahoo, only 2 environmental terms in the world are searched more often than FreeCycle: global warming and recycling. By the summer of 2012, FreeCycle had more than 9 million members in over 110 countries, expanding at a rate of 8,000 members every week. Many people still join with a taker mentality, hoping to get as much free stuff as possible. But receiving benefits from a group of local citizens who serve as role models for small acts of giving continues to create a common identity in FreeCycle communities, nudging many members in the giver direction. Together, the 9 million FreeCycle members give away more than 30,000 items a day weighing nearly 1,000 tons. If you piled together the goods given away in the past year, they'd be 14 times taller than Mount Everest. As Charles Darwin once wrote, a tribe with many people acting like givers, who were always ready to aid one another, and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over most other tribes, and this would be natural selection. When I learned about the success of FreeCycle, I began to wonder if these principles could play out in everyday life, in an organization without an environmental focus. What would it take to create and sustain a giving system in a company or a school? The reciprocity ring. When I joined the faculty at Wharton, the world's oldest collegiate business school, I decided to try a giving experiment in my classroom. I announced that we would be running an exercise called the reciprocity ring, which was developed by University of Michigan sociologist Wayne Baker and his wife Cheryl at Humax. Each student would make a request to the class, and the rest of the class would try to use their knowledge, resources, and connections to help fulfill the request. The request could be anything meaningful in their professional or personal lives, ranging from job leads to travel tips. In a matter of minutes, I was facing a line of students, some cynical, others anxious. One student pronounced that the exercise wouldn't work, because there aren't any givers at Wharton. Givers study medicine or social work, not business. Another admitted that he would love advice from more experienced peers on strengthening his candidacy for consulting jobs, but he knew they wouldn't help him, since they were competing with him for these positions. Soon, these students watched in disbelief as their peers began to use their networks to help one another. A junior named Alex announced that he loved amusement parks, and he came to Wharton in the hopes of one day running Six Flags. He wasn't sure how to get started, Could anyone help him break into the industry? A classmate, Andrew, raised his hand and said he had a weak tie to the former CEO of Six Flags. Andrew went out on a limb to connect them, and a few weeks later, Alex received invaluable career advice from the ex-CEO. A senior named Michelle confided that she had a friend whose growth was stunted due to health problems and couldn't find clothes that fit. A fellow senior, Jessica, had an uncle in the fashion business, and she contacted him for help. 3 months later, custom garments arrived at the doorstep of Michelle's friend. Wayne Baker has led reciprocity rings at many companies, from GM to Bristol-Myers Squibb. Oftentimes, he brings leaders and managers together from competing companies in the same industry and invites them to make requests and help one another. In one session, a pharmaceutical executive was about to pay an outside vendor $50,000 to synthesize a strain of the PC's alkaloid. The executive asked if anyone could help find a cheaper alternative. One of the group members happened to have slack capacity in his lab, and was able to do it for free. The reciprocity ring can be an extremely powerful experience. Bud Ahern, a group president at CH2M Hill, noted that leaders in his company are strong endorsers, not only because of the hundreds of thousands of annual dollar value, but because of the remarkable potential to advance the quality of our whole lives. Baker has asked executives to estimate the dollar value and time saved in participating for 2.5 hours. 30 people in an engineering and architectural consulting firm estimated savings exceeding $250,000 in 50 days. 15 people in a global pharmaceutical firm estimated savings of more than $90,000 in 67 days. Personally, after running the reciprocity ring with leaders, managers, and employees from companies such as IBM, Citigroup, Estée Lauder, UPS, Novartis, and Boeing, I've been amazed by the requests that have been fulfilled, from landing a coveted job at Google to finding a mentor to receiving autographed memorabilia from a child's favorite professional football player. But before this happens, just as my Wharton students did, many participants question whether others will actually give them the help that they need. Each time, I respond by asking whether they might be underestimating the givers in their midst. In a study by researchers Frank Flynn and Vanessa Bones, people learned that they would be approaching strangers in New York City and asking them to fill out a survey. The participants estimated that only 1 out of every 4 people would say yes. In reality, when the participants went out and asked, 1 out of every 2 said yes. In another study in New York City, when participants approached strangers and asked them to borrow a cell phone, they expected 30% to say yes, but 48% did. When people approached strangers, said they were lost and asked to be walked to a nearby gym, they expected 14% to do it, but 43% did. And when people needed to raise thousands of dollars for charity, they expected that they would need to solicit donations from an average of 210 people to meet their fundraising goals, anticipating an average donation under $50. They actually hit their goals after approaching half as many people. On average, it only required 122 people, whose donations were over $60 each. Why do we underestimate the number of people who are willing to give? According to Flynn and Bones, when we try to predict others' reactions, we focus on the costs of saying yes, overlooking the costs of saying no. It's uncomfortable, guilt-provoking, and embarrassing to turn down a small request for help. And psychological research points to another factor, equally powerful, and deeply rooted in American culture, that causes people to believe there aren't many givers around them. Workplaces and schools are often designed to be zero-sum environments, with forced rankings and required grading curves that pit group members against one another in win-lose contests. In these settings, it's only natural to assume that peers will lean in the taker direction, so people hold back on giving. This reduces the actual amount of giving that occurs, leading people to underestimate the number of people who are interested in giving. Over time, because giving appears to be uncommon, people with giver values begin to feel that they're in the minority. As a result, even when they do engage in giving behaviors, people worry that they'll isolate themselves socially if they violate the norm, so they disguise their giving behind purely self-interested motives. As early as 1835, after visiting the United States from France, the social philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville wrote that Americans enjoy explaining almost every act of their lives on the principle of self-interest. He saw Americans help one another and freely give part of their time and wealth for the good of the state, but was struck by the fact that Americans are hardly prepared to admit that these acts were driven by a genuine desire to help others. I think that in this way they often do themselves less than justice, he wrote. A century and a half later, the Princeton sociologist Robert Wuthnow interviewed a wide range of Americans who chose helping professions, from cardiologists to rescue workers. When he asked them to explain why they did good deeds, they referenced self-interested reasons, such as, "I like the people I was working with," or, "It gets me out of the house." They didn't want to admit that they were genuinely helpful, kind, generous, caring, or compassionate. We have social norms against sounding too charitable, Wuthnow writes, such that we call people who go around acting too charitable, bleeding hearts, do-gooders. In my experience, this is what happens in many businesses and universities. Plenty of people hold giver values, that suppress or disguise them under the mistaken assumption that their peers don't share these values. As the psychologists David Kreck and Richard Crutchfield explained many years ago, this creates a situation where no one believes, but everyone thinks that everyone believes. Consider a 2011 survey of Harvard freshmen. They consistently reported that compassion was one of their top values, but near the bottom of Harvard's values. If many people personally believe in giving, but assume that others don't, the whole norm in a group or a company can shift away from giving. Ideas can have profound effects even when they are false, when they are nothing more than ideology, writes the psychologist Barry Schwartz. These effects can arise because sometimes when people act on the basis of ideology, they inadvertently arrange the very conditions that bring reality into correspondence with the ideology. When people assume that others aren't givers, they act and speak in ways that discourage others from giving, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. As a structured form of giving, the reciprocity ring is designed to disrupt this self-fulfilling prophecy. The first step is to make sure that people ask for help. Research shows that at work, the vast majority of giving that occurs between people is in response to direct requests for help. In one study, managers described times when they gave and received help. Of all the giving exchanges that occurred, roughly 90% were initiated by the recipient asking for help. Yet when we have a need, we're often reluctant to ask for help. Much of the time, we're embarrassed. We don't want to look incompetent or needy, and we don't want to burden others. As one Wharton dean explains, the students call it game face. They feel pressured to look successful all the time. There can't be any chinks in their armor, and opening up would make them vulnerable. In the reciprocity ring, because everyone is making a request, there's little reason to be embarrassed. By making requests explicit and specific, participants provide potential givers with clear direction about how to contribute effectively. As in Free Cycle, the reciprocity ring often starts with givers stepping up as role models for contributions. But in every reciprocity ring, there are likely to be many matchers and some people who prefer to operate as takers. For a generalized giving system to achieve sustainable effectiveness, as in Free Cycle, these matchers and takers need to contribute. Otherwise, the givers will end up helping everyone while receiving little in return, placing themselves at risk for getting burned or burning out. Do matchers and takers step up? Because people often present meaningful requests in reciprocity rings, many matchers are drawn in by empathy. When I heard a powerful CEO's voice tremble as he sought advice and connections to fight a rare form of cancer, the empathy in the room was palpable. I was surprised by how much I wanted to help, one financial services executive confides. My job requires me to be very task-focused and financially oriented. I didn't expect to care that much, especially about a stranger I'd never met. But I really felt for his need, and wanted to do whatever I could to contribute and fulfill his request. Even when they don't empathize, matchers still end up making plenty of contributions. It's very difficult to act like a pure matcher in the reciprocity ring, since it's unlikely that the people you help will be the same people who can help fulfill your request. So the easiest way to be a matcher is to try to contribute the same amount that other people do. The reciprocity ring creates a miniature version of Panda Adam Rifkin's network. Participants are encouraged to do 5-minute favors for anyone else in the group. To make sure that every request is granted, participants need to make multiple contributions, even to people who haven't helped them directly. By giving more than they take, participants amplify the odds that everyone in the group will have their requests fulfilled, much like Panda Adam setting a pay-it-forward norm in his network. But what about the takers? Many audiences are concerned that takers will capitalize on the opportunity to get help without contributing in return. To examine this risk, Wayne Baker and I surveyed more than 100 people about their giver and taker values. Then they participated in the reciprocity ring, and we counted the number of contributions they made. As expected, the givers made significantly more contributions than the takers. The givers averaged 4 contributions each. Surprisingly, though, the takers were still quite generous, averaging 3 contributions each. Despite valuing power and achievement far more than helping others, the takers gave 3 times more than they got. The reciprocity ring created a context that encouraged takers to act like givers, and the key lies in making giving public. Takers know that in a public setting, they'll gain reputational benefits for being generous in sharing their knowledge, resources, and connections. If they don't contribute, they look stingy and selfish, and they won't get much help with their own requests. Being altruistic is often seen as good, and being greedy or selfish is not, writes Duke behavioral economist Dan Ariely with 2 colleagues, so giving is a way to signal to others that one is good. Research shows that givers usually contribute regardless of whether it's public or private, but takers are more likely to contribute when it's public. In one study, when others could see their results, takers contributed a large number of ideas during brainstorming. But when their results were hidden, takers added less value. Other studies reveal that takers go green to be seen. They prefer luxurious products over green products when their decisions are private, but shift to green products when their decisions are public, hoping to earn status for protecting the environment. I saw a similar trend among Wharton students. Each week in class, I opened the floor for a few students to present requests and invited the whole class to contribute. One November morning, 5 students made requests, and I was stunned to see a student who had described himself as a taker offer to help 4 of them. Once his reputation among his peers depended on giving, he contributed. By making contributions visible, the reciprocity ring sets up an opportunity for people of any reciprocity style to be otherish. They can do good and look good at the same time. Identity shifts and reciprocity reversals. This raises a fundamental question. Does a generalized giving system like FreeCycle or the reciprocity ring motivate takers to become better fakers, or can it actually turn takers into givers? In some ways, I'd say the motives don't matter. It's the behavior itself that counts. If takers are acting in ways that benefit others, even if the motives are primarily selfish rather than selfless or otherish, they're making contributions that sustain generalized giving as a form of exchange. That said, if we ignore motives altogether, we overlook the risk that takers will decrease their giving as soon as they're out of the spotlight. In one study conducted by Chinese researchers, more than 300 bank tellers were considered for a promotion. The managers rated how frequently each bank teller had engaged in giving behaviors like helping others with heavy workloads and volunteering for tasks that weren't required as part of their jobs. Based on giving behavior, the managers promoted 70 of the bank tellers. Over the next 3 months, the managers came to regret promoting more than half of the tellers. Of the 70 tellers who were promoted, 33 were genuine givers. They sustained their giving after the promotion. The other 37 tellers declined rapidly in their giving. They were fakers. In the 3 months before the promotion, they knew they were being watched, so they went out of their way to help others. But after they got promoted, they reduced their giving by an average of 23% each. What would it take to nudge people in the giving direction? When Harvard Dean Thomas Dingman saw that Harvard students valued compassion but thought others didn't, he decided to do something about it. For the first time in the university's 4 centuries, Harvard freshmen were invited to sign a pledge to serve society. The pledge concluded, "As we begin at Harvard, we commit to upholding the values of the college and to making the entryway and yard a place where all can thrive and where the exercise of kindness holds a place on a par with intellectual attainment." Believing in the power of a public commitment, Dingman decided to go one step beyond inviting students to sign the pledge. To encourage students to follow through, their signatures would be framed in the hallways of campus dorms. A storm of objections quickly emerged, most notably from Harry Lewis, a computer science professor and the former dean of Harvard College. "An appeal for kindness is entirely appropriate," Lewis responded. "I agree that the exercise of personal kindness in this community is too often wanting," he wrote on his blog, "but for Harvard to invite people to pledge to kindness is unwise, and sets a terrible precedent." Is Lewis right? In a series of experiments led by NYU psychologist Peter Gallwitzer, people who went public with their intentions to engage in an identity-relevant behavior were significantly less likely to engage in the behavior than people who kept their intentions private. When people made their identity plans known to others, they were able to claim the identity without actually following through on the behavior. By signing the kindness pledge, Harvard students would be able to establish an image as givers without needing to act like givers. Dingman quickly dropped the idea of posting signatures publicly. But even then, evidence suggests that privately signing a kindness pledge might backfire. In one experiment, Northwestern University psychologists randomly assigned people to write about themselves using either giver terms like caring, generous, and kind or neutral terms like book, keys, and house. After the participants filled out another questionnaire, a researcher asked them if they wanted to donate money to a charity of their choosing. Those who wrote about themselves as givers donated an average of 2.5 times less money than those who wrote about themselves with neutral words. "I'm a giving person," they told themselves, "so I don't have to donate this time." The kindness pledge might have a similar effect on Harvard students. When they sign the pledge, they establish credentials as givers, which may grant them a psychological license to give less, or take more. When we're trying to influence someone, we often adopt an approach that mirrors the Harvard pledge. We start by changing their attitudes, hoping that their behaviors are likely to march in the same direction. If we get people to sign a statement that they'll act like givers, they'll come to believe that giving is important, and then they'll give. But according to a rich body of psychological detective work, this reasoning is backward. Influence is far more powerful in the opposite direction. Change people's behaviors first, and their attitudes often follow. To turn takers into givers, it's often necessary to convince them to start giving. Over time, if the conditions are right, they'll come to see themselves as givers. This didn't happen to the bank tellers in China. Even after 3 months of helping colleagues, once they got promoted, they stopped giving. Over the past 35 years, research launched by Batson and his colleagues shows that when people give, if they can attribute it to an external reason like a promotion, they don't start to think of themselves as givers. But when people repeatedly make the personal choice to give to others, they start to internalize giving as part of their identities. For some people, this happens through an active process of cognitive dissonance. Once I've made the voluntary decision to give, I can't change the behavior, so the easiest way to stay consistent and avoid hypocrisy is to decide that I'm a giver. For other people, the internalization process is one of learning from observing their own behaviors. To paraphrase the writer E.M. Forster, how do I know who I am until I see what I do? In support of this idea, studies of volunteering show that even when people join a volunteer organization to advance their own careers, the longer they serve and the more time they give, the more they begin to view the volunteering role as an important aspect of their identities. Once that happens, they start to experience a common identity with the people they're helping, and they become givers in that role. Research documents a similar process inside companies. As people make voluntary decisions to help colleagues and customers beyond the scope of their jobs, they come to see themselves as organizational citizens. Part of the wisdom behind free cycle and the reciprocity ring is that both of these generalized giving systems encourage giving while maintaining a sense of free choice. Although there's a strong norm of giving, it's entirely up to each participant to decide what to give and whom to help. When my Wharton class went through the reciprocity ring, as different students chose their own ways to give and peers to help, a distinctive common identity began to develop. This is a unique group of people at Wharton that cares about each other, one student said. Although the students were competing for the same jobs in management consulting and investment banking, they started helping one another prepare for interviews, sharing tips and offering advice. After the class ended, a group of students took the initiative to start an alumni listserv so that they could continue helping one another. According to one student, because of the emphasis on the benefit of giving and helping in our shared community, I'd be far more comfortable and likely to ask for, and probably receive, help from a random member of the alumni group than my other groups. At the end of the semester, the cynical student who had questioned whether there were any givers at Wharton quietly approached me. Somehow, he said, everyone in the class became intrinsically motivated to give, and it transcends the class itself. 9. Out of the shadows. Some people, when they do someone a favor, are always looking for a chance to call it in. And some aren't, but they're still aware of it, still regard it as a debt. But others don't even do that. They're like a vine that produces grapes without looking for anything in return. After helping others, they just go on to something else. We should be like that. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor. A number of years ago, an imposing figure made his mark on the sports world. Well over 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, Derek Sorensen was a tough, aggressive competitor who struck fear into the hearts of his opponents. He led his NCAA team to a national championship and went on to play in the pros. After his career was cut short by an injury, he was courted by the finest professional teams in his sport to become a contract negotiator. He would be wheeling and dealing with players and agents in the hopes of building a world-class team. To sharpen his bargaining skills, Derek enrolled in a negotiation course at a leading business school. During each class session, he had the chance to practice negotiating in a variety of roles, ranging from a pharmaceutical executive trying to buy a manufacturing plant to a condo developer in a heated dispute with a carpenter. In one of his earliest negotiations, Derek bought a property as a real estate investment, and in top-taker form, he persuaded the listing agent to sell at a price that went directly against her client's interests. On an icy winter evening, Derek played the role of one of 4 fishermen who ran competing businesses. They were overfishing to the point that the resource would become extinct, and they sat down to discuss how they should handle the dilemma. One negotiator suggested that they should split the maximum total fishing in 4 equal parts. Another proposed a different way of matching based on equity rather than equality. Since some of them were running larger operations than others, they should each reduce their fishing by 50%. They all agreed that this was a fair solution, and the meeting was adjourned. Now, it was up to each negotiator to make an individual decision about whether to honor the agreement and how much to fish. 2 of the negotiators stuck to their commitments, reducing their fishing by 50%. The third operated like a giver. She reduced her fishing by 65%. The group was all set to keep the resource intact, but Derek chose not to reduce his fishing at all. He took as much as he could, actually increasing his fishing total and decimating the other 3 entrepreneurs. Before the group met, Derek had the lowest profits of the 4. After he took far more than his share of the harvest, his profits were 70% higher than the givers and 31% higher than those of the other 2. When confronted by his colleagues, Derek responded, "I wanted to win the negotiations and destroy my competitors." Just a few months later, Derek began a meteoric rise in his career. He was hired by a professional sports team and established a reputation as a dominant negotiator, playing a key role in assembling a team that went on to win a world championship. Derek was promoted in an unusually short period of time and recognized as one of the 100 most powerful people in his sport, while still in his 30s. When Derek first started working for his team as a professional negotiator, His job was to manage the budget, identify top prospects, and negotiate contracts with agents to sign new players and keep existing players. Since resources were tight, bargaining like a taker would work to his advantage. Derek began to search for underrated talent, and stumbled upon a gem of a player in the minor leagues. He sat down with the player's agent to negotiate a contract. True to form, Derek made a lowball offer. The agent was frustrated. Several comparable players were earning higher salaries. The agent accused Derek of pushing him around and demanded more money, but Derek ignored the demands and didn't budge. Eventually, the agent gave in and agreed to Derek's terms. It was a win for Derek, saving his team thousands of dollars. But when Derek went home that night, he had an uneasy feeling. I could just feel through the conversation that he was pretty upset. He brought up a couple points on comparable players, and in the heat of things, I probably wasn't listening too much. He was going away with a bad taste in his mouth. Derek decided he didn't want to end the exchange with the agent on a sour note. So he tore up the contract and met the agent's original request, giving him thousands of extra dollars for the player. Was this a wise decision? Derek was costing his team money, and potentially creating a precedent for doing so in other negotiations. Besides, the deal was settled. The agent had agreed to the lowball offer and Derek had achieved his goal. Going back on it hardly seemed like a smart move. Actually, it was much smarter than it first appeared. When Vanderbilt researchers Bruce Berry and Ray Friedman studied negotiations, they had a hunch that sharper negotiators would get better results, as they could gather and analyze more information, keep track of multiple issues, and generate hidden solutions. In one study, Berry and Friedman obtained data on the intelligence of nearly 100 MBA students. They measured intelligence using each student's score on the GMAT, a rigorous test that is widely used in business school admissions to measure quantitative, verbal, and analytical abilities. The participants negotiated in pairs, playing either the developer of a new mall or the representative of a potential store to anchor the mall. After they finished negotiating, they submitted their final agreements, and two experts assessed the value of the deal to each party. As expected, the joint gains were highest when both parties were very intelligent. Berry and Friedman broke down each party's gains, expecting to find that the smarter negotiators got better deals for themselves. But they didn't.
The brightest negotiators got better deals for their counterparts.
The smarter negotiator appears to be able to understand his or her opponent's true interests and thus to provide them with better deals at little cost to him or herself, Berry and Friedman write. The more intelligent you are, the more you help your counterpart succeed. This is exactly what Derek did when he gave the agent more money for the minor league player. He was giving in an otherish way that was low cost to him but high benefit to the agent and the player. A few $1,000s was small potatoes to his team, but very significant to the player. What drove Derek to shift in the giver direction? Shortly before the negotiation with the agent, Derek had gained a window into something that mattered deeply to him: his reputation. At the end of the negotiation course, every participant submitted votes for negotiation awards. Derek received 0 votes for most cooperative, 0 for most creative, and 0 for most ethical. In fact, there was only one award for which he received any votes. For this particular award, Derek received the vast majority of the votes. He was the landslide winner for most ruthless. But Derek achieved something more memorable that week. He became the only student in business school history to be voted the most ruthless negotiator in a class that he never took. At the same time that he was enrolled in his course, another negotiation class was underway. None of these students in the other class ever sat across the bargaining table from Derek. Some of them had never met him. Yet his reputation spread so quickly that they voted for him as most ruthless anyway. Derek was negotiating the way any reasonable person would in a taker's world. As a professional athlete, he had learned that if he didn't claim as much value as possible, he was at risk for becoming a doormat. It was the team against the player. The team was always trying to take money out of my pocket, so I viewed a negotiation to be a combative process, which produced a winner and a loser, Derek says. I had to try to take more and more. After being anointed the most ruthless negotiator by his peers, and a group of strangers, Derek began to reflect on his reciprocity style at the bargaining table. While I gained a short-term benefit by taking, in the long run I paid. My relationship with a colleague was ruined, and it caused the demise of my reputation, he said. In the negotiation with the agent, when he ripped up the contract and gave the agent more money, it built goodwill. The agent was extremely appreciative, Derek reflects. When the player came up for free agency, the agent gave me a call. Looking back on it now, I'm really glad I did it. It's definitely improved our relationship and helped out our organization. Maybe most ruthless is maturing. Actually, I believe maturing is the wrong way to describe Derek's transformation. Maturation implies a process of growth and development, but in a sense, Derek was actually taking a step backward to express core values that he had embraced for years away from the bargaining table. Long before he ever negotiated like a taker, his peers perceived him as a generous, helpful person who would make time for anyone who asked. He spent countless hours providing advice to colleagues who were interested in sports management careers and mentoring young athletes who aspired to follow in his footsteps. Growing up, he was elected captain of virtually every team on which he played, from elementary school through high school, all the way through college. He even became captain as a rookie on his first professional team. Players twice his age respected his commitment to putting the team's interests ahead of his own. At the bargaining table, Derek's transition wasn't about learning a new set of values. It was about developing the confidence and courage to express an old set of values in a new domain. I believe this is true for most people who operate like matchers professionally, and my hope is that others like Derek won't wait for a most ruthless award to start finding ways to act in the interest of others at work. For Derek these days, a signature form of giving is helping opposing teams gather information about players. Even though they're competing in a zero-sum sport, he shares knowledge to help rival teams make good decisions about players who have been on his team in the past. On the field, I want to beat up opposing teams. But off the field, I'm always trying to help them out. Today, Derek attributes his success in building a championship-winning professional sports team to his shift from taking toward giving. Yet he still worries about what will happen if people outside his inner circle find out about his shift in the giver direction. In fact, Derek Sorensen is a pseudonym. Before sharing his story, he asked me to disguise his identity. I don't want it to get out there that I've given more money than I needed to a player, he says. These fears persist among many successful givers, but they're not insurmountable. Consider Sherry Ann Pless, the financial services executive from the opening chapter who hid the fact that kindness and compassion emerged as her top strengths. When I originally asked her to tell her story, like Derek, she only agreed under the condition that she would remain anonymous. 6 months later, she changed her mind. I've started an underground campaign of givers coming out of the closet, she said. Being a giver has contributed to my personal and professional success. It's liberating to talk about it. I'm not afraid anymore. What changed her mind? When Sherry Ann first recognized her giver attributes, she was focused on the risks. People expected her to be tough and results-oriented, and might see giving as a sign of weakness. But when she started taking a close look around her company, she was struck by the realization that all of her professional role models were givers. Suddenly, her frame of reference shifted. Instead of just seeing givers at the bottom, she recognized a surprising number of givers at the top. This isn't what we usually notice when we glance up at the horizon at successful people. By and large, because of their tendencies toward powerful speech and claiming credit, successful takers tend to dominate the spotlight. But if you start paying attention to reciprocity styles in your own workplace, I have a hunch that you'll discover plenty of givers achieving the success to which you aspire. Personally, the successful people whom I admire most are givers, and I feel that it's my responsibility to try and pass along what I've learned from them. When I arrived at Wharton, my charge was to teach some of the world's finest analytic minds to become better leaders, managers, and negotiators. I decided to introduce them to reciprocity styles, posing the question that animated the introduction to this book. Who do you think ends up at the bottom of the success ladder? The verdict was nearly unanimous: givers. When I asked who rises to the top, the students were evenly split between matchers and takers. So I chose to teach them something that struck them as heretical. You might be underestimating the success of givers, I told them. It's true that some people who consistently help others without expecting anything in return are the ones who fall to the bottom. But this same orientation toward giving, with a few adjustments, can also enable people to rise to the top. Focus attention and energy on making a difference in the lives of others, and success might follow as a byproduct. I knew I was fighting an uphill battle, so I decided to prove them wrong. This book is that proof. Although many of us hold strong giver values, we're often reluctant to express them at work. But the growth of teamwork, service jobs, and social media has opened up new opportunities for givers to develop relationships and reputations that accelerate and amplify their success. We've covered evidence that givers can rise to the top across a stunningly diverse range of occupations, from engineering to medicine to sales. And remember when Peter Odette, the Australian financial advisor, seemed to be wasting hours of his time by driving out to help a poor scrap metal worker manage his money? The client turned out to be the wealthy owner of a scrap metal business, resulting in major gains for Peter's firm, but the story doesn't end there. Peter learned that the scrap metal owner was too busy running the business to take a vacation, and he wanted to help. A few months later, another client expressed that she wasn't happy in her job as a manager at an auto body shop. Peter recommended her to the scrap metal owner, who had a need for her skills, and it turned out that she lived 5 minutes away from the scrap metal yard. She started work 3 weeks later, and the client took his wife on their first vacation in years. Both of these clients are happy and grateful that I think about their whole lives, not just their investments, Peter says. The more I help out, the more successful I become. But I measure success in what it has done for the people around me. That is the real accolade. In the mind of a giver, the definition of success itself takes on a distinctive meaning. Whereas takers view success as attaining results that are superior to others and matchers see success in terms of balancing individual accomplishments with fairness to others, givers are inclined to follow Peter's lead, characterizing success as individual achievements that have a positive impact on others. Taking this definition of success seriously might require dramatic changes in the way that organizations hire, evaluate, reward, and promote people. It would mean paying attention not only to the productivity of individual people but also to the ripple effects of this productivity on others. If we broadened our image of success to include contributions to others along with individual accomplishments, people might be motivated to tilt their professional reciprocity styles toward giving. If success required benefiting others, it's possible that takers and matchers would be more inclined to find otherish ways to advance personal and collective interests simultaneously. The connection between individual and collective success underlies every story of successful givers in this book. As an entrepreneur, Adam Rifkin built his network of influential people by trying to help everyone he met, launching successful companies and enabling thousands of colleagues to find jobs, develop skills, and start productive businesses along the way. As a venture capitalist, David Hornick invested in lucrative companies and fortified his reputation by helping aspiring entrepreneurs create better pitches and gain funding for their startups. As a comedy writer, George Meyer earned Emmys and established a reputation as the funniest writer in Hollywood while elevating the effectiveness of opening doors for the people who collaborated with him on Army Man and The Simpsons. In the classroom, C.J. Skender earned dozens of teaching awards while inspiring a new generation of students, seeing their potential and motivating them to achieve this potential, and Conry Callahan sustained her energy and was nominated for a National Teaching Award after she started a nonprofit to help underprivileged children prepare for college. In healthcare, Kildare Escoto and Nancy Phelps rose to the top of their company's sales revenue charts by striving to help patients. In consulting, Jason Geller and Lillian Bauer made partner early by virtue of the contributions that they made through mentoring and developing others, which in turn enriched the knowledge of junior colleagues. In politics, Abraham Lincoln became president and built a legacy as one of the greatest leaders in world history by helping his rivals earn coveted political positions. This is what I find most magnetic about successful givers. They get to the top without cutting others down, finding ways of expanding the pie that benefit themselves and the people around them. Whereas success is zero-sum in a group of takers, in groups of givers, it may be true that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Armed with this knowledge, I've seen some people become more strategic matchers, helping others in the hopes of developing the relationships and reputations necessary to advance their own success. Can people succeed through instrumental giving, where the primary intent is getting? At the beginning of the book, I suggested that in the long term, the answer might be no. There's a fine line between giving and clever matching, and this line blurs depending on whether we define reciprocity styles by the actions themselves, the motives behind them, or some combination of the two. It's a deep philosophical question, and it's easy to identify with a range of views on how strategic matchers should be evaluated. On the one hand, even if the motives are mixed, helping behaviors often add value to others, increasing the total amount of giving in a social system. On the other hand, as we saw with Ken Lay, our behaviors leak traces of our motives. If recipients and witnesses of our giving begin to question whether the motives are self-serving, they're less likely to respond with gratitude or elevation. When strategic matchers engage in disingenuous efforts to help others primarily for personal gain, they may be hoisted by their own petard. Fellow matchers may withhold help, spread negative reputational information, or find other ways to impose a taker tax. To avoid these consequences, would-be matchers may be best served by giving in ways that they find enjoyable, to recipients whose well-being matters to them. That way, even if they don't reap direct or karmic rewards, matchers will be operating in a giver's mindset, leading their motives to appear and become more pure. Ultimately, by repeatedly making the choice to act in the interest of others, strategic matchers may find themselves developing giver identities, resulting in a gradual drift in style toward the giving end of the reciprocity spectrum. We spend the majority of our waking hours at work. This means that what we do at work becomes a fundamental part of who we are. If we reserve giver values for our personal lives, what will be missing in our professional lives? By shifting ever so slightly in the giver direction, we might find our waking hours marked by greater success, richer meaning, and more lasting impact. Actions for impact. If you're interested in applying the principles in this book to your work or your life, I've compiled a set of practical actions that you can take. Many of these actions are based on the strategies and habits of successful givers, and in each case, I've provided resources and tools for evaluating, organizing, or expanding giving. Some of the steps focus on incorporating more giving into your daily behaviors. Others emphasize ways that you can fine-tune your giving, locate fellow givers, or engage others in giving. 1. Test your giver quotient. We often live in a feedback vacuum, deprived of knowledge about how our actions affect others. So that you can track your impact and assess your self-awareness, I've designed a series of free online tools. Visit to take a free survey that tests your giver quotient. Along with filling out your own survey, you can invite people in your network to rate your reciprocity style, and you'll receive data on how often you're seen as a giver, taker, and matcher. 2. Run a reciprocity ring. What could be achieved in your organization, and what giving norms would develop, if groups of people got together weekly for 20 minutes to make requests and help one another fulfill them? For more information on how to start a reciprocity ring in your organization, visit Cheryl and Wayne Baker's company, Humax, which offers a suite of social networking tools for individuals and organizations. They've created materials to run a reciprocity ring in person and a Ripple effect tool for running it online. People typically come together in groups of 15 to 30. Each person presents a request to the group members, who make contributions. They use their knowledge, resources, and connections to help fulfill the request. Another startup, Favo.rs, has created an online marketplace where people can make and fulfill requests for help. 3. Help other people craft their jobs, or craft yours to incorporate more giving. People often end up working on tasks that aren't perfectly aligned with their interests and skills. A powerful way to give is to help others work on tasks that are more interesting, meaningful, or developmental. In 2011, a vice president named Jay at a large multinational retailer sent emails to each of his employees announcing a top-secret mission, with details to be shared on a need-to-know basis in only on one meetings. When employees arrived individually for the meetings, Jay unveiled the confidential project. He asked them what they would enjoy doing that might also be of interest to other people. He inquired about their hobbies and personal interests, and what they would love to spend more time doing at the company. He then sent them out into the company to pursue their mission with 3 rules. It has to, 1. Appeal to at least one other person, 2. Be low or no cost, and 3. Be initiated by you. Throughout the year, Jay checked in to see how the secret missions were going. About 2/3 of his employees had made some effort toward making their visions a reality, and roughly half of those employees succeeded in launching them. One of Jay's favorite missions resulted in a book club where employees read books and discussed topics that were of personal interest and relevance to their jobs. People had permission to do all of that stuff before I ever asked that question, Jay reflects. But somehow, asking that question in my role gives people permission to pursue their interests in a way they didn't have before. It's planting seeds, with some percentage of them turning into real initiatives. These seeds have bloomed for many of his employees, and for Jay as well. In 2012, he was selected to become the vice president of HR for a major division of his company, where he's responsible for more than 45,000 employees. In the secret missions, Jay encouraged his employees to engage in job crafting, a concept introduced by Amy Wierzesniewski and Jane Dutton, management professors at Yale and the University of Michigan, respectively. Job crafting involves innovating around a job description, creatively adding and customizing tasks and responsibilities to match personal interests and values. A natural concern is that people might craft their jobs in ways that fail to contribute to their organizations. To address this question, Amy, Justin Berg, and I partnered with Jennifer Kurkowski and Brian Well, who run a people and innovation lab at Google. In a study across the United States and Europe, we randomly assigned Google employees working in sales, finance, operations, accounting, marketing, and human resources to a job crafting workshop. The employees created a map of how they'd like to modify their tasks, crafting a more ideal but still realistic vision of their jobs that aligned with their interests and values. 6 weeks later, their managers and coworkers rated them as significantly happier and more effective. Many Google employees found ways to spend more time on tasks that they found interesting or meaningful. Some delegated unpleasant tasks, and others were able to customize their jobs to incorporate new knowledge and skills that they wanted to develop. All told, Google employees found their work more enjoyable and were motivated to perform better, and in some cases, these gains lasted for 6 months. Job crafting worked across reciprocity styles. Givers, takers, and matchers all became more effective. The givers saw job crafting as an opportunity to expand their impact, so they generated ways to add more value to other people in the company, such as mentoring junior colleagues, creating better products for clients, and improving training for new hires. The matchers were grateful for the opportunity to pursue more meaningful and interesting work, and reciprocated by working harder. Even the takers recognized that to advance their own careers, they needed to craft their jobs in ways that would benefit the company as well as themselves. To help people craft their jobs, Justin, Amy, and Jane have developed a tool called the Job Crafting Exercise. It's what we used to conduct the Google workshops, and it involves creating a before sketch of how you currently allocate your time and energy, and then developing a visual after diagram of how you'd like to modify your job. The booklets can be ordered online, and completed in teams or individually to help friends and colleagues make meaningful modifications to their jobs. 4. Start a love machine. In many organizations, givers go unrecognized. To combat this problem, organizations are introducing peer recognition programs to reward people for giving in ways that leaders and managers rarely see. A Mercer study found that in 2001, about 25% of large companies had peer recognition programs, and by 2006, this number had grown to 35%, including celebrated companies like Google, Southwest Airlines, and Zappos. A fascinating approach called the Love Machine was developed at Linden Lab, the company behind the virtual world Second Life. In a high-technology company, many employees aim to protect their time for themselves and guard information closely, instead of sharing their time and knowledge with colleagues. The Love Machine was designed to overcome this tendency by enabling employees to send a love message when they appreciated help from a colleague. The love messages were visible to others, rewarding and recognizing giving by linking it to status and reputations. One insider viewed it as a way to get tech geeks to compete to see who could be the most helpful. Love helped to boost awareness of people who did tasks that were sometimes overlooked. Our support staff, for instance, often received the most love, says Chris Colosi, a former Linden manager. Once you introduce a certain percentage of takers into your system, you need to think about what effect an incentive will have, but I enjoyed the idea of love for tasks that were outside of someone's job description or requirements. To try out the Love Machine in your organization, look up a new electronic tool called Send Love. It's available from Love Machine, a new startup that asks you to start by choosing a recognition period. Team members can send each other short messages recognizing giving, and the messages are all publicly visible. 5. Embrace the 5-minute favor. If you visit a 106 Miles meetup, you might see Panda Adam Rifkin in top form. He's a master of the 5-minute favor, and you can follow Panda's lead by asking people what they need and looking for ways to help at a minimal personal cost. Rifkin's 2 favorite offers are to give honest feedback and make an introduction. For example, here's a simple exercise to get started as a connector. Start by going through your Rolodex, LinkedIn, or Facebook network. Identify pairs of people who share an uncommon commonality. Then, pick 1 pair a week and introduce them by email. Rifkin also recommends reconnecting with dormant ties, not to get something, but to give. Once a month, reach out to 1 person with whom you haven't spoken in years. Find out what they're working on and ask if there are ways that you can be helpful. On a related note, you can learn more about David Hornick's approach to giving by visiting Venture Blog. 6. Practice powerless communication, but become an advocate. Developing greater comfort and skill with powerless communication requires a change in habits, from talking to listening, self-promoting to advice-seeking, and advocating to inquiring. Jim Quigley, a senior partner at Deloitte who previously served as CEO, decided to work on his powerless communication. He set a goal in meetings to talk no more than 20% of the time. One of my objectives is listening. Many times, you can have bigger impact if you know what to ask, rather than knowing what to say. I don't learn anything when I'm speaking. I learn a lot when I'm listening, Quigley told me. As he shifted from answers toward questions, Quigley found himself gaining a deeper understanding of other people's needs. It doesn't come naturally to everyone, but it's a habit, and you can form that habit. For more on the power of powerless communication, visit the blogs by Susan Cain and Jennifer Kahnweiler. At the same time, it's important to make sure that powerless communication doesn't come at the expense of assertiveness when advocating for others' interests and our own. Get Raised as a free resource that offers advice on negotiating salary increases. According to co-founder Matt Wallard, the average pay increase is $6,726, provided that you're underpaid. About half of male users succeed in getting a raise, compared with 3/4 of female users. 7. Join a community of givers. To find other givers, join a free cycle community to give away goods and see what other people need. Another inspiring community of givers is Service Space, the home of a series of giftivism initiatives started by Nippon Meta. Headquartered in Berkeley, California, Service Space has over 400,000 members and sends over 50 million emails a year. Yet they still operate by 3 rules: no staff, no fundraising, and no strings attached. Through Service Space, Nippon has created a platform for people to increase their giver quotients, divided into 3 categories: gift economy projects, inspirational content, and volunteer and nonprofit support. One of the gift economy projects is Karma Kitchen, where the menu has no prices. When the bill arrives, it reads $0 and contains just 2 sentences. Your meal was a gift from someone who came before you. To keep the chain of gifts alive, we invite you to pay it forward for those who dine after you. Another gift economy project is helpothers.org, which collects stories of people playing give or tag. Do something anonymously for someone else, and leave a smile card inviting them to pay it forward. Nipun describes how one woman at a Fortune 500 company went to get a drink from the vending machine, and put extra change in with a note. Your drink has been paid for by someone you don't know. Spread the love. Then, she brought in donuts and left another smile card behind. A guy noticed this trend, and he decides to send an email to the whole building, Nipun says, laughing. The guy writes, "I've been trying to track them down for a long time, and I think it's between floors 2 and 3. Now everybody's on alert for kindness, and a bunch of people start doing it." On the Service Space website, you can order smile cards, help support nonprofit causes, subscribe to the weekly newsletter, or read a thought-provoking list of ways to give, such as paying the toll for the person behind you or thanking people for helping you by writing a complimentary note to their boss. The more you give, the more you want to do it, as do others around you. It's like going to the gym, Nipun says. If you've been working out your kindness muscles, you get stronger at it. Another impressive initiative is Hope Mob, billed as the place where generous strangers unite to bring immediate hope to people with pressing needs all over the world. For ideas about how to organize your own group of people to perform random acts of kindness, see the initiatives underway at Extreme Kindness in Canada, and the Kindness Offensive in the UK. The Kindness Offensive is a group of people who strive to be aggressively helpful, organizing some of the grandest random acts of kindness in human history. They've provided a toy for every child in a hospital in London, given away 500,000 pancakes, distributed tons of giveaways at festivals around Britain, provided free medical supplies and housing support to families in need and hosted tea parties for elderly people, obtained an electric guitar for a 10-year-old boy, and landed free front row seats and behind-the-scenes training at the Moscow Circus for a father hoping to surprise his daughter. It may be no coincidence that the founder's name is David Goodfellow. You might also be intrigued by BNI, Ivan Misner's business networking organization with the motto of Givers Gain, as well as the Go-Giver Community, a group of people who read the Go-Giver Fable by Bob Burg and John David Mann, and decided that giving would be a powerful way to live their professional lives. 8. Launch a personal generosity experiment. If you'd rather give on your own, try the Good 30-Day Challenge. Each day for a month, Good suggests a different way to give. For more examples of random acts of kindness, check out Sasha Dichter's 30-Day Generosity Experiment. And Ryan Garcia's Year of Daily Random Acts of Kindness. Dichter, the Chief Innovation Officer at the Acumen Fund, embarked on a month-long generosity experiment in which he said yes to every request for help that he received. Garcia, a sales executive at ZocDoc, is performing one random act of kindness every day for an entire year and keeping a blog about his experience, from stepping up as a mentor to thanking a customer service representative. As we saw in Chapter 6, this generosity experiment is likely to be most psychologically rewarding if you spend somewhere between 2 and 11 hours a week on it, and if you distribute it into larger chunks, multiple acts once a week, instead of one act every day. 9. Help fund a project. Many people are seeking financial support for their projects. On Kickstarter, known as the world's largest funding platform for creative projects, you can find people looking for help in designing and launching movies, books, video games, music, plays, paintings, and other products and services. On Kiva, you can identify opportunities to make microloans of $25 or more to entrepreneurs in the developing world. Both sites give you the chance to see and follow the progress of the people you help. 10. Seek help more often. If you want other people to be givers, one of the easiest steps is to ask. When you ask for help, you're not always imposing a burden. Some people are givers, and by asking for help, you're creating an opportunity for them to express their values and feel valued. By asking for a 5-minute favor, you impose a relatively small burden, and if you ask a matcher, you can count on having an opportunity to reciprocate. Wayne and Cheryl Baker note that people can start the spark of reciprocity by making requests as well as helping others. Help generously and without thought of return, but also ask often for what you need. Thank you from Nation Audiobooks. Hope you enjoy this audiobook.